Captain, there is no power. There is no power. My controls, your controls. Nepal, a country that has seen 32 fatal accidents since the year 2000. Over the skies of Pokhara, First Officer Anju is in her final flight before she becomes a captain. She is 5 minutes away from landing, but she is flying an approach that she has never flown before. With her in the cockpit is her instructor, who is guiding and checking her performance. With everything going great, there is suddenly a warning in the cockpit. The plane has just lost power. The engines have become unresponsive. The aircraft starts losing altitude. They are just 500 feet off the ground, and the runway is very close. It's just 1 minute away. She increases the power lever. Nothing. Pushes it to the max. Nothing. The senior pilot immediately takes over control. The plane keeps dropping. They can see the runway, but at that time, the plane starts banking to the left. Will the 72 people on board this plane land safely, or will this become another black mark on Nepal's already poor aviation record? Let's find out. This is the story of Yeti Airlines Flight 6691. It's a beautiful sunny day in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, and this is an exciting day for First Officer Anju Katiwada, because by the end of the day, she would become Captain Katiwada. Please see the correction in the pinned comment. And that would be a dream come true. She is a nurse by education, but she decided to pursue flying after her husband, Captain Deepak Pokral, was killed in a plane crash in Nepal in 2006. 4 years after Deepak's death, she went to the United States to train to be a pilot. And in 2010, she returned to Nepal to join Yeti Airlines, the same airline that her husband used to fly for. She is one of only 6 female pilots employed by the company. And she had over 6,400 hours of experience. With Anju in the cockpit was Senior Captain Kamal KC. He had around 22,000 hours of flying experience and had joined Yeti Airlines in 2009. He usually does the final check before a pilot is promoted. And that's the reason he's on this flight today. Her flights today are between Kathmandu and Pokhara. Pokhara is Nepal's second most populous city. It's an incredibly picturesque metropolitan city in the middle of Nepal, and in recent times it has emerged as Nepal's tourism capital. It's the entry point for the Annapurna mountain range of the Himalayas, and hence it is frequented by many international visitors. And to accommodate these tourists, a new international airport was constructed between 2016 and 2022. The airport was inaugurated just 2 weeks earlier on New Year's Day, 2023. Now let's get familiar with Pokhara. Kathmandu is around 150 kilometers in this direction. The new airport was constructed just 3 kilometers to the east of an existing airport. The two ends of the runway are runways 12 and runways 30. Planes flying in from Kathmandu would usually land on runway 30 for a straight-in approach. The runway 12 didn't have a published visual approach. Yeti Airlines had created one internally, which had the planes flying clear of the mountains by making tight turns and flying at a lower altitude. This did not meet the requirements of a stabilized visual approach. The plane for today's flight was an ATR 72-500. This is a turboprop regional airliner meant for short-distance flights. This particular plane was 16 years old, having first flown for India's Kingfisher Airlines and then for Thailand's Nok Air before being sold to Yeti in 2019. It's a workhorse and very reliable plane, and this specific one was in a good working condition. First Officer Anju and Captain Kamal were scheduled to do 2 round trips to Pokhara today. A flight from Kathmandu to Pokhara is 26 minutes long. First Officer Anju was on her check ride. She was sitting in the commander's left seat, and Captain Kamal was in the right seat. While approaching Pokhara during the first flight, the ATC assigned them runway 30 and they made a safe straight-in landing. After 30 minutes, the plane reboarded, took on additional fuel, and taxied to the runway. The flight took off from Pokhara and 26 minutes later landed uneventfully in Kathmandu. The next leg is going to be the incident flight. Anju was 30 minutes of flight time away from completing her 100 hours to become Captain Anju. All it was going to take was to fly this flight from Kathmandu back to Pokhara and land it safely. In the cabin, flight attendant Ocean Magar is preparing the cabin for the flight. She is also a popular Nepalese TikToker, and she filmed and uploaded a fun little video for her fans. The passengers began boarding the plane, and amongst the 72 passengers are a group of 4 Indian tourists who were live streaming their flight on Facebook. In the cockpit, the 2 pilots are preparing for the flight. Now let's take a quick look at the center console here. It's going to play a part in the incident today. Here on the left is a lever that controls the speed brake, emergency brake, and the parking brake. Next to it are the power levers. And all the way here to the right is a flap switch. It's shaped like a little wing. And between the power lever and the flaps lever is what's called a condition lever. And to learn what it does, let's step outside the plane. The ATR is a turboprop airplane. It uses these big fans here to produce thrust. And to understand how this works, let's start here from the wing. Now, in our previous video, I'd illustrated how a wing works. But just to recap, the top of the wing is curved. The wing that flows over the wing, due to the top of the wing being curved, needs to travel a longer distance, and hence that creates a low pressure zone. The bottom of the wing has higher pressure, and this pressure difference pushes or lifts the plane up in this direction. So this is now an upwards force, but I need the plane to go in this direction. Simple, let's rotate the wing 90 degrees like this. But how do I get the wind to flow over the wings in this orientation? When it's in the normal orientation, the plane accelerating down the runway would make the wind flow over it. But that's not going to help here. Here's the front view of that wing. Maybe I could spin the wing like this, and that would create the same effect of the wind flowing over it. Nice. So there's a low pressure area on the right here and a high pressure area on the left, which creates a force pushing the wing in this direction. Now, I don't want to manually rotate this wing forever, so let me add a motor or an engine, or if you want to be fancy, a turbine that will keep rotating this wing for me. Now, what if I wanted more thrust? I need a higher pressure differential. So let me just add more wings. So now there's a much lower pressure area here and a much higher pressure area here, causing a higher force in this direction. Does this look familiar? The propellers are actually just tiny wings generating lift in the forward direction. But there are times during a flight where you don't want additional momentum to be created. Let's say during taxi, or let's say when there is an engine failure and you need to glide the plane a long distance. If the propellers are in their normal position, it'll create unnecessary drag. So in order to reduce the drag, you can feather the propellers, simply turning it in the direction of the wind so that the difference in pressure is removed. And going back to the additional lever in the cockpit, this lever is used to feather the propellers. When the lever is in the forward position, the propeller generates thrust. And when the lever is in the back position, the propellers are feathered, thus not creating forward momentum. Now let's get back to our story. We are at Tribhuvan International Airport at Kathmandu, and the crew has just finished one circuit to Pokhara, and they are ready for the second leg of the day. The plane pushed back and taxied to the runway at 10:20 a.m. local time. Flight 691 then departed Tribhuvan International Airport at 10:32 a.m. local time. After flying over the scenic Himalayan mountains and whilst 15 miles from the airport, they made contact with Pokhara ATC. The ATC cleared them for a straight-in approach on runway 30, the same approach that they had done a couple of hours earlier on the first flight of the day. But since this was her familiarization flight, Captain Kamal wanted to make sure that First Officer Anju was familiar with the runway 12 approach as well. So they requested ATC for a runway 12 approach, and the ATC cleared them for that. Remember, this is an approach that hasn't been approved by the Nepal Aviation Authority. The crew has also not been trained on this approach. The tight nature of the approach will also add to the workload of the crew. The plane reached top of descent at 10:51 a.m., flying at 6:50.